Me, I'm different. I just have a different constitution. I have a different brain. I have a different heart. I have a different. I get tiger blood, man.
To admit that I am, in fact, HIV positive. What people forget is that that's money they're taking from my children. They think it's just me, but I got 5 kids and a granddaughter.
Charlie Sheen once had the kind of career most actors spend a lifetime chasing and never catch. An Oscar-winning war film before he turned 22. A role opposite one of cinema's greatest villains in a movie that redefined an entire decade. The highest paycheck in the history of television. And then, almost in slow motion, all of it came apart in public through arrests, addiction, a diagnosis he hid for years, and a meltdown so strange and so widely broadcast that it briefly became one of the most talked about news stories on the planet. Now, at 60 years old, Charlie Sheen is still standing, sober, and finally talking honestly about all of it. Tonight we're tracing exactly how he got from Platoon to Winning to where he is now, and whether any of it could have gone differently. To understand how Charlie Sheen became who he became, you have to start with the family he was born into. He arrived on September 3, 1965, in New York City, born Carlos Irwin Estevez, the youngest son of actor Martin Sheen and artist Janet Templeton. At the time, his father was still years away from the level of recognition he'd eventually reach, still grinding through the kind of uncertain early career most working actors experience. When a family eventually settled in Malibu, California, young Charlie spent countless hours making amateur short films with his older brother, who'd later become known professionally as Emilio Estevez, alongside neighborhood friends who would go on to become genuine Hollywood names themselves, including Rob Lowe and Sean Penn Long. Before any of them were famous, they were just teenagers messing around with cameras, fake explosions, and homemade scripts in their backyards. Even then, Charlie seemed determined to build something of his own rather than simply follow in his father's footsteps. Rather than pursuing a conventional education, he threw himself almost entirely into acting, eventually dropping the family surname Estevez in favor of Sheen, the same stage name his father had adopted decades earlier. It was the beginning of a career that would, remarkably fast, outpace even his father's own. That breakthrough came astonishingly early. At just 20 years old, Charlie landed the lead role of Chris Taylor in Oliver Stone's Vietnam War film Platoon, shot under famously grueling conditions in the jungles of the Philippines. Stone reportedly put his cast through intense, military-style preparation designed to simulate the physical exhaustion and psychological toll experienced by real soldiers, and the resulting performances earned widespread critical praise for how genuinely lived-in they felt. Charlie's restrained, haunted portrayal of an idealistic young recruit caught Hollywood's attention almost immediately. When Platoon won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1987, Charlie Sheen had become the face of one of the defining American films of the decade. His momentum only accelerated from there. Later that same year, Stone cast him again, this time opposite Michael Douglas in Wall Street, where Charlie played Bud Fox, an ambitious young stockbroker seduced by wealth and status under the influence of Douglas's unforgettable Gordon Gekko. The film became a genuine cultural landmark, and its famous line about greed entered everyday vocabulary almost overnight. Looking back, plenty of people have noted the strange irony that Bud Fox's arc, a young man undone by his own appetite for excess, would end up echoing pieces of Sheen's own life in the years that followed. By the late 80s, Charlie had become one of the industry's most reliably bankable young stars, following up Wall Street with a run of commercially successful films across multiple genres. Even as his professional reputation kept climbing, though warning signs had already begun quietly surfacing away from the movie sets. For a while, the illusion held. The best, professionally at least, was still ahead of him. When Charlie Sheen accepted the role of Charlie Harper on the CBS sitcom 2.5 Men in 2003, few people could have predicted he was about to become the highest-paid actor on American television. Created by Chuck Lorre and Lee Aronson, the show followed two brothers sharing a Malibu beach house, with Sheen playing a wealthy, irresponsible bachelor whose life revolved around expensive cars, beautiful women, and avoiding anything resembling adult responsibility. Audiences found the character irresistible, partly because it never quite felt like fiction. Charlie Harper looked, talked, and lived so much like Charlie Sheen himself that viewers often joked he wasn't really acting at all. America couldn't get enough. Within just a few seasons, 2.5 Men had become one of the most watched sitcoms on television, regularly drawing audiences in the tens of millions during its peak years. Alongside co-stars Jon Cryer and Angus T. Jones, Sheen helped turn what looked on paper like a simple family comedy into a genuine cultural phenomenon, one that dominated its time slot and became one of the most profitable sitcoms ever produced. That level of success translated into genuinely staggering wealth. Sheen's salary climbed to record-breaking levels for television, reportedly reaching close to $1.8 million per episode by the later seasons, pushing his annual earnings into the tens of millions before syndication profits and endorsement deals were even factored in. Hollywood had certainly seen wealthy television stars before, but rarely at this scale. Executives considered him essentially irreplaceable. CBS had one of the biggest hits in the country, and nearly everyone involved had a direct financial incentive to keep things running exactly as they were. There was a real irony buried in all of it, though. The very qualities that made the show so successful also made the situation unusually volatile. Charlie Harper's constant drinking, gambling, and refusal to grow up mirrored Sheen's own carefully cultivated public image so closely that a lot of fans genuinely stopped distinguishing between the character and the man playing him. For years, that blurred line made the show feel authentic and kept audiences hooked. It wouldn't stay that way forever. Long before Charlie Sheen's public collapse became an international story, the warning signs had been quietly piling up for years. Back in 1990, Sheen accidentally shot his then-fiancée, actress Kelly Preston, in the arm at his California home after a handgun discharged. She later described it as an accident. No criminal charges were filed. But the bizarre incident drew enormous media attention and marked one of the first times the public associated Charlie Sheen with controversy rather than acting talent. Not long after, reports of heavy drinking and substance use became an increasingly regular feature of entertainment coverage surrounding him, and by the middle of that decade, stints in rehabilitation had already become a recurring pattern in his life. In 1995, Sheen testified under oath during a criminal investigation into a high-profile Los Angeles escort operation, acknowledging he'd spent tens of thousands of dollars through it. Only a year later, the trouble became more directly personal. In 1996, Sheen pleaded no contest to misdemeanor battery after an incident involving his then-girlfriend inside his California home. She later filed a civil lawsuit describing serious injuries, and the case was eventually settled. It was becoming clear that whatever Sheen was struggling with wasn't just affecting him anymore. Some hoped the legal consequences might finally force lasting change. Instead, the pattern simply repeated itself again and again through the late 90s and into the 2000s, with Sheen entering treatment multiple times, each return to work accompanied by optimistic statements about having regained control, only for the cycle to resurface later. Remarkably, producers kept hiring him because despite everything happening off camera, he had a reputation for arriving on set prepared and delivering strong performances. That contradiction fascinated a lot of people in the industry. How could someone whose personal life looked increasingly chaotic continue functioning so effectively in front of the camera? The illusion of stability took another hit when his marriage to actress Denise Richards, which began in June of 2002 and produced 2 daughters, deteriorated rapidly under intense media scrutiny, substance abuse allegations, and bitter legal disputes, with Richards eventually filing for divorce while pregnant with their second child. A similar pattern followed with his next marriage to Brooke Mueller in May of 2008, which produced twin sons the following year. Then, on Christmas Day of 2009, police in Aspen, Colorado arrested Sheen after Mueller accused him of threatening her during an argument while the couple was on holiday. He ultimately pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault as part of a plea deal requiring probation, rehabilitation, and anger management classes, and the arrest dominated headlines specifically because it happened while 2.5 Men remained one of the biggest shows on American television. Less than a year later, police responded to a New York hotel after reports that Sheen had caused extensive damage to his suite during what authorities described as a drug and alcohol-fueled incident, and he was taken to a hospital for evaluation. Throughout nearly all of this, remarkably, he kept showing up to film 2.5 Men. To some colleagues, that consistency looked like genuine professionalism. To others, it simply demonstrated how long extraordinary talent and extraordinary wealth could delay an inevitable reckoning. That reckoning arrived in full public view within just a few months. In January of 2011, the carefully balanced illusion finally gave out completely. Production on 2.5 Men was suspended when Sheen entered yet another rehabilitation program, something that had happened many times before without much lasting fallout. This time was different. Rather than expressing regret, Sheen projected total, almost theatrical confidence, insisting publicly that he had never felt better. In one interview, he claimed to possess what he called Adonis DNA and tiger blood. In another, he referred to himself as a warlock. Then came the single word that would define the entire episode: winning. The phrase spread everywhere, across television, social media, t-shirts, and everyday conversation, becoming one of the defining pop culture catchphrases of that entire decade almost overnight. The interviews fascinated observers as much as they entertained them. Some addiction specialists later suggested that his rapid speech and inflated self-confidence resembled patterns associated with substance use or manic episodes, though no medical professional publicly diagnosed him from a distance. And others believed he was simply leaning into exaggerated persona because he understood exactly how modern media cycles worked. CBS was forced to halt production entirely, announcing the remainder of that season would be canceled, and Sheen's relationship with the show's creator, Chuck Lorre, deteriorated almost immediately after Sheen took offense at one of Lorre's signature closing credit messages. Within days, Sheen's public comments turned openly hostile, referring to Lorre repeatedly by his birth name in a mocking tone across multiple interviews and calling him a range of insulting names. He argued publicly that the show couldn't survive without him and claimed he had personally generated enormous revenue for the studio, insisting the balance of power ran entirely in his favor. Executives disagreed. On March 7, 2011, the studio formally terminated his contract, citing dangerous conduct and repeated violations of his obligations. Sheen responded almost immediately with a $100 million lawsuit against Warner Brothers and Lorre, alleging wrongful termination. The studio denied the claims, and by September of that year, both sides had reached a confidential settlement. Meanwhile, the show moved forward without him. When 2.5 Men returned that September, Charlie Harper had been written out of the series entirely, and actor Ashton Kutcher joined the cast in a new role. Many assumed the show would collapse without its original star, but it continued for 4 more seasons before ending in 2015. Sheen, in the meantime, tried to capitalize on the enormous attention surrounding his public unraveling by launching a live tour built around his winning persona. Tickets sold quickly, but the opening performance in Detroit fell apart almost immediately, with audience members booing and walking out as Sheen struggled to deliver a coherent show, and similar scenes played out at other stops, forcing organizers to adjust the format just to keep the tour running. Looking back, the strangest part of the entire spectacle might be what almost nobody watching actually knew at the time. While comedians built entire routines around him, and his catchphrases turned into some of the earliest viral memes of the social media era, Charlie Sheen was quietly carrying a private diagnosis that would eventually change how the public understood everything they just watched. Around 2011, right in the middle of the public chaos everyone was witnessing, doctors informed Sheen that he was HIV positive. For nearly 4 years afterward, almost nobody outside a small, tightly guarded circle knew. He's since described receiving that news as one of the most devastating moments of his life, forcing him to confront his own mortality even though modern antiretroviral treatment had already transformed HIV from what was once considered a near-certain death sentence into a manageable chronic condition. His physician, Dr. Robert Huizinga, later confirmed publicly that Sheen did not have AIDS and that early treatment gave him an excellent long-term outlook. Still, for someone already dealing with addiction, legal troubles, and constant public scrutiny, it was one more enormous burden layered on top of everything else. And rather than disclosing it, Sheen chose to share the information only with people he believed he could trust completely. That decision, he'd later say, opened the door to a different kind of nightmare entirely. During a November 17, 2015 interview with Matt Lauer on NBC's Today Show, Sheen alleged that several people who learned about his diagnosis had begun demanding money in exchange for staying silent about it. He said he ultimately paid out millions of dollars over several years trying to keep his private medical information from being sold to tabloids, describing one particularly alarming incident in which someone allegedly photographed his medication and threatened to expose him unless paid. He explained that the money being extorted from him was, in his words, money being taken directly from his children, and said he finally decided to go public because he could no longer continue living under what felt like constant blackmail. Sheen didn't publicly name most of the people he accused, and few of the specific details around those alleged extortion attempts have ever been independently verified, though in the years that followed, several former partners did file lawsuits alleging he had failed to disclose his HIV status before intimate encounters, claims Sheen denied. Some of those disputes were ultimately resolved through confidential settlements, without any admission of wrongdoing. The secrecy officially ended that day in November of 2015, when Sheen sat across from Matt Lauer on live television and stated plainly that he was, in fact, HIV positive. The announcement stunned viewers around the world. Dr. Huizinga appeared alongside him to confirm that modern treatment had suppressed the virus to an undetectable level, and that Sheen's immune system remained healthy, while medical experts used the moment to remind the public that HIV and AIDS are not the same condition. Sheen described the disclosure itself as both terrifying and genuinely freeing, framing it as the end of years spent living in fear and secrecy. What happened next surprised even public health researchers. Studies tracking online behavior found a dramatic, measurable spike in searches related to HIV testing and prevention immediately following Sheen's announcement, along with a documented rise in actual HIV testing across the United States in the weeks that followed, a phenomenon researchers eventually nicknamed the Charlie Sheen effect. It was, in a strange way, one of the few unambiguously positive outcomes to emerge from an otherwise painful chapter of his life. By the end of 2015, Charlie Sheen had survived public humiliation, the collapse of his biggest career opportunity, addiction, and one of the most closely scrutinized medical disclosures in celebrity history. It still wasn't the end of the story. After going public with his diagnosis, plenty of people expected Charlie Sheen to engineer one of Hollywood's classic comeback narratives. He had, after all, survived nearly everything a public downfall could throw at someone, and the industry has always loved a redemption arc. What actually followed was more complicated than that. His first real attempt at rebuilding had technically started even before the HIV disclosure, when he returned to television in June of 2012 in the FX comedy Anger Management, playing a former baseball player turned anger management therapist, a role that once again blurred the line between the character and the actor playing him. The show premiered to strong initial ratings, and, thanks to an unusual deal structure, quickly earned a massive additional episode order, making it one of the fastest sitcoms in television history to reach the 100-episode mark. On paper, that looked like another success story. In reality, the show never came close to matching the cultural dominance of 2.5 Men, with ratings steadily declining after its debut and audiences seemingly more interested in Sheen himself than in the show he was actually starring in. Then came another controversy, this time involving co-star Selma Blair, who played a central character and recurring love interest opposite Sheen for much of the show's run. In the summer of 2013, multiple entertainment outlets reported that Blair had privately raised concerns to producers about Sheen's on-set conduct, and that he responded by demanding she be removed from the series, reportedly threatening to stop filming himself if she stayed. The studio issued only a brief statement confirming she would not be returning, without elaborating further, and Blair largely avoided discussing the situation publicly. Her character was written out abruptly, with months of storyline simply left unresolved. Sheen later offered a different account during a talk show appearance, claiming her exit had been a planned creative decision rather than the result of any conflict, though that explanation conflicted with earlier reporting, and the full sequence of what actually happened behind the scenes has never been fully clarified by the studio. When Anger Management ended in December of 2014, something noticeably shifted. The steady stream of major offers that had once defined his career simply didn't return at the same scale. He continued taking occasional guest roles and smaller projects, but the era of studios building major productions specifically around him had effectively ended. Meanwhile, the financial consequences of years of expensive divorces, legal settlements, and lavish spending steadily caught up with him, leading to court filings showing dramatic drops in his income compared to his peak years, requests to reduce child support payments, and the sale of multiple luxury properties as he worked to reorganize his finances. The wealth that had once seemed genuinely limitless was no longer enough to insulate him from ordinary financial reality. By the time Charlie Sheen turned 60 on September 3, 2025, the days of tiger blood and public meltdowns were long behind him. He's spoken instead about a genuine reset, saying he's remained sober since December of 2017 and crediting long-term recovery with finally giving him real stability. He's also said that living with HIV no longer defines his daily life, thanks to consistent treatment that keeps his viral load undetectable. That perspective shaped both his memoir and a documentary revisiting the full arc of his career, from extraordinary early success through addiction, public humiliation, and eventual survival. Reactions to that reflection have been mixed, with some praising his willingness to revisit painful chapters honestly, and others feeling it didn't fully grapple with how his behavior affected the people closest to him. Some professional relationships from that era, including with former co-star Jon Cryer, remain distant to this day. The young actor who once seemed destined to define an entire generation of Hollywood leading men lost enormous amounts of money, several relationships, a chunk of his career momentum, and very nearly his own health along the way. And yet, against genuinely long odds, he's still here, sober, honest about the parts of the story that used to stay hidden, and by his own account, simply focused on getting through the next moment rather than chasing the version of stardom that once defined him. If this look at Charlie Sheen's rise, fall, and long road back resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments, and stick around for more honest looks at the stories behind Hollywood's biggest names.